Okay, thank you. Good morning, members. We do have a quorum, and can I now call the meeting of the Committee for Communities to order and welcome all of you to Fáilte Rómha Lig to the 69th meeting of the Committee for Communities. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can be used through a Wi-Fi connection and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to Assembly's Wi-Fi network. No recordings or photographs are to be taken. Can I also remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of the cameras when using the tablet device. I would also like to remind you once again about the sensitivity of microphones and the presence of cameras throughout the meeting. For any members joining via Zoom, can I ask you to be mindful of whether the camera in your device is able to pick up any other people or background that you may not wish to be seen, and consider blurring background, and please keep camera on when you're attending the meeting, when you're in attendance. Agenda item 1, declaration of interests. Members have any interest wish to declare? Kelly?
Member of the deaf community and also an associate of Chartered Institute of Housing.
Okay, thank you. And else members? No, thank you. Any apologies then? Are members aware? You have 2 apologies. Any members aware of any apologies? Do we have any apologies? No. No, thank you. Okay, Chair's business then. Members, I'm sure you're all aware of immediate attention in relation to the request from Commonwealth Games. NI, the board has taken a decision based on a correspondence from the Minister. I have seen that correspondence reported, but I haven't actually seen the content of the letter. I think it's important just to say I think all sports, there should be efforts made to be inclusive and supportive as possible for our athletes, and that's the approach that should be taken. But would members be content if we seek a copy of the letter that went to the board? Yeah. The second item, members, I would like to raise is around concerns that have been received from within the constituency and from outside the constituency, and I heard it again at an APG on social enterprise this week in relation to the impact of the local growth fund. Massive issues, but I just want the members of any comments they want to feed in or contribute, and I want to credit the work of that APG on what's a very important part of and a very important development and community work into that social business type model. Kelly?
Yeah, 64, well, what the figures that have been quoted to me in correspondence has been a 64% reduction that will come forward into Northern Ireland. We know, of course, this is coming from Westminster, and the priorities for the expenditure is being decided by Westminster. Even though the Department for Communities and the Minister has been asking to have input, they haven't, so the priorities will be up to Westminster whenever we finally see that. But the communications that the public have, the community and voluntary sector have seen about the 64%, I wouldn't mind actually asking the Northern Ireland office if they would share that information with us. The applications went live and we weren't asked or weren't informed even that was happening. So there's a bit of a breakdown there between what the NIO are doing and the Assembly. So it would be useful if we could maybe ask the Northern Ireland office, just, as a courtesy, can this committee receive information of what's coming out about funding, given the fact that we do have an interest and we can support in getting that out and let people know about that. But the fact is that we are now getting the comments and the commentary back from the community and voluntary sector about the stresses that they will have with this fast reduction. And we know, of course, it's 70% capital and 30% revenue. In the past, when I worked in the community and voluntary sector, John Speller MP bought 30 minibuses for community transport and not a penny for petrol or paying somebody to drive them. Lovely things to look at, but how are we going to run them? And it seems like this is a similar type of fund. No, it does. It's like the tsunami started in the British Treasury, but it's going to wash up on the community sector here, and that's really. And actually, we have already written, I believe, and check with her. Have we had a response to that?
No.
So we have, but can we follow up maybe on that?
There was a generic response last week from NIO about the fund, but not specifically to come to brief or the criteria and addressing the questions the committee had asked.
And Chair, finance is actually the lead on, isn't
Yeah.
it? So I presume we've already written to finance a bit of concerns. I mean, there are huge concerns around this,
Yeah.
but it's actually technically not for this committee, even though it kind of gets fed.
Yeah, it's certainly
through,
impacting
but finance would be the lead
but
for-
yes, it does sit in finance, and that's another. I know John O'Dowd has addressed it and expressed his concern in the Assembly chamber in his role. But it's one of these outworkings that I suppose we all predicted and feared, and is now arriving. Probably worse than we ever, even those of us who thought it would be bad.
Sure,
envisaged.
if we haven't already, can we write to the finance minister?
We've done so.
We've
haven't
done
we?
so
We have
already.
written, yes,
Okay.
and we've had a response. I can get those forwarded to you.
Okay.
Okay.
UK Shared Prosperity Fund, that going 650 jobs in the community and voluntary sector, and it looks like what is coming in now, because the priorities that Westminster has earmarked, not what Northern Ireland needs. Like over the years, Northern Ireland has built an awful lot of stuff on the basis of capital monies got through peace. We need the revenue money now, and to be honest, I'm really concerned. I know that our minister has the community and voluntary sector, and it's the fallout of this and the fact that Northern Ireland didn't get to have say in the priorities for this. I know finance will deal with the money side of it, but for here we're looking at 650 people being made redundant if those organisations are not successful in bidding.
Well, should we seek an update from the department in what engagement they have had with Treasury or Finance here, and also what they're currently what their current situation, or are there ongoing discussions around it? If members are content.
Because it's that access to employment piece that's going to fall down badly, and that's one of the key priorities that the minister is looking to drive forward.
Yeah. No, very, very concerning, I have to say, and does need raised as an issue by all departments right across government, because it's the impact is massive, and also it's very important to note a lot of the services that these groups are delivering are statutory services. So, okay, well listen. So
Have a
Claire,
letter to NIO and copy the finance minister's ones to Pam.
Yeah.
Nothing to DFC.
DFC were asking what discussions are ongoing around the impact or any mitigation potentially, I think.
We have sent that letter already.
That's
That's gone in the last week or two. Yeah.
Okay, we'll have to keep an eye on that one, members. So thank you. Moving on then to agenda item 4, which is draft minutes. And the draft minutes from the meeting on the 8th of January are contained at page 7. Do members have any edits or amendments they wish to raise to the draft minutes? No. Are members then content to agree the minutes of the 8th of January as drafted?
Yep.
Thank you. Moving on, members, to matters arising, and you've been provided with a summary table of matters arising at page 24. A smaller number of responses for consideration this week, but still a few very important matters. As usual, I'll ask for comments and request to use the reference number where you can, please, for each item. So I'll ask members then, in relation to the first block that we will consider is 5.2 to 5.5. 5.2 there is a response from NIHE in relation to our queries about numbers of accessible new builds for disabled people and older people, and item 5.3 is a response from NIO re-support for retrofitting. So can I check if members have any comments in relation to this block, Kelly?
Yeah, it just would be of interest to me if we could have a formal response back from the housing executive on the categories. They talk there about the older people's housing, and it's category 1 homes. What are all the categories? You know, if we can get a list of that. I know we can Google it, but it'd be good to have the formal communication from the housing executive giving a breakdown of those. I just have concerns that an older person's accommodation, is it on the flat? So that's why they don't have to consider accessibility, because with an ageing population, we just need to make sure that we're not having to spend so much adapting houses, which I agree with the minister, yeah.
Yeah, and I'd be a bit concerned as well. And I know the minister did in October raise the fact that there's a review taking place of those design standards. I think, bearing in mind we have an ageing population, that certainly needs to be, the demographic realities need to be factored into that. However, it's a bit unclear as to where that review is now sits in terms of timings or whatever. So could we ask the department around the timelines for that, when that review will take place? Who will undertake the review? What expert advice will be sought as part of that review? And how service user voices and co-production will be included in that important review.
Yeah. And Chair, just when we go flip over onto page 25, I'm a little bit concerned that DFC will undertake that review of design standards, but the balance that they talk about completely excludes section 75. So they talk about appropriate balance between cost, quality and sustainability. But for instance, accessibility is important. I know that there seems to be this thing that you build cheaper houses by not putting the whole life standards in. I can't see how that is, because if you have to put it back in again later, it's saving money now but paying it later, probably at twice the price. So, but my concern is that the review of design standards should consider the people who will live there, not just cost, quality and sustainability.
Yeah, and that's why I would like to know how that will be included. I think you're right.
If we can ask them why in that list that that they've sort of provided in the communications, why haven't they included the actual tenants, the people, the section 75 groups?
Members content with that? I do want to also flag, so in terms of retrofitting, some of these standards are about flat access. I don't think that, so potentially you have to landscape to that. It could be the case when you go to try to achieve that later, that the land, it isn't, you don't own the land neighbouring, or that can't be done. So I'm not so sure that some of that would even be possible to be retrofitted within the house, yes, but that landscaping and that ability for people to go out into their backyard. So I think that all needs to be considered carefully. I'm not saying that there's not potential to, and where there's potential to look at standards, they should, but they absolutely need to protect both the housing stock to meet the needs of the population and also ensure that people can live in their homes on the basis of a healthy and a supportive home environment, because we need that for health reasons as well. Okay, Melissa?
Just in 5.3 about the house retrofitting, that whilst they have identified, we'll say the North has been responsible for that themselves, per se, they also then talk about the National Wealth Fund. And to what extent, say, or if any of that fund has come to the north of Ireland, and does it have a potential, if it is coming, to assist with retrofitting in the future?
So a query to the department around whether we've received any of that, or are receiving, or going to.
And can we perhaps write to the Committee on the Economy asking about this as well, that National Wealth Fund, because that 1.3 billion, what percentage have we got, as Malaysia has said, but from economy's point of view, is this something that is to be applied for, or is there an allocation to Northern Ireland? I know I'm talking about economy because I'm thinking about the businesses and who will be able to tap into this. So it would be interesting to find out, maybe write it to both economy and finance to say, are they aware of the National Wealth Fund? What is the process by their understanding, and how much of the £1.3 billion are they anticipating that will be used within, finance to say how much we're getting, economy to say how much it could be used.
Members content with that query? Just check with
so I've got the letters to economy and finance. It was DFC initially, so copying the NIO letter that the committee has to the DFC and asking specifically about involvement in conversations for National Wealth Fund and how much.
If any of that fund has actually come in to the north.
Okay. And that was agreed, yes.
Yeah. Or what has come to date, or what we might expect.
But also above that, it's the Warm Homes Plan. It's 13.2 billion. Did we get any of that? If it's allocated for councils, local authorities in England, we tend not to get it here because of the way that we're set up. So it'd be useful if the Warm Homes Plan, to know exactly how much is there. And also there's an offer there about a knowledge sharing base, to ask the department how much they're taking up that learning, so we can learn from people's mistakes. Northern Ireland's very good at doing things 2 or 3 years after other parts of the UK, and we can learn from mistakes and don't fall into those again. But I'm particularly interested to see how the retrofitting, how they're taking up that offer from the Westminster government.
Members content with that? And Clerk, are you content with the detail? Okay, members, go ahead, Kelly.
5.4.
Yeah.
Can I just double check? I know it'll probably have to be in closed session at some stage. We've been provided with papers that have confirmed about applications for JRs, but that's not a JR. It would be useful to know if an application for JR is actually legal proceedings, because I didn't believe that it was.
I think we were told quite clearly that it's not.
Well, that's what I don't
Not
know.
yet active.
Not active.
Yes, well, the JR hasn't been approved, so that's why I'm thinking. So we've asked for the legal papers and we've been given that. That's still not the legal papers then. Yeah.
Was the question to legal?
Yeah, to legal,
legal
just
services?
to clarify, if somebody has made an application for a JR, is that the start of legal proceedings, or does that legal proceedings only start after a JR has been agreed, that application has been agreed by the courts?
Okay, thank you. And I know we're coming on to that issue again in 5.7 and 5.8. However, 5.5 then, if we could just go to that, is a draft of the committee report into homelessness and the supporting people programme. That's arising out of the session we did in Skienos Centre. So I'll ask if members have any comment or suggest amendments, and I'll come to Kelly first, and then we're going to come to Mark Durkin. So Kelly.
I emailed some of the thoughts on that after discussions with some of the homeless groups. There's quite a number, but do you want to take that later on then?
So
I'm happy to go through them one by one. All members don't have that.
Yeah.
well, I'll just briefly come to Mark then first, then we'll go through those, because I wasn't clear whether everyone had those, but I knew you had to put them forward. So go ahead, Mark.
Sorry, Chair, I'm going to bring you back a wee bit just on the 5.2, the accessible homes bit. I understand that's about new builds and that in DFC, but I was wondering, could we maybe write to DFI, if it's not beyond our bailiwick, to establish the approach of the department to applications for dropped curbs and to serve existing properties for people with disabilities. I've just noticed over the past while, people who go about this the right way and do contact DFI seeking permission find it extremely difficult to do so, even though they can point to various properties, maybe even in the same street, where people have just ploughed on and sought forgiveness rather than permission and found it easier. But it is an issue, and it's one that's impacting people with disabilities. And then in 5.4, in terms of the legal action, just maybe to seek some clarity, they've provided the evidence there, I suppose, of the commencement or intent to pursue legal action from Derry City and Crusaders, but it had been reported in the Belfast Telegraph, I think on the 15th of November, that Coleraine were also engaged in a legal process. I don't know what the status of that is, or maybe could we seek some clarity from the department as to whether that materialised or not?
Okay, are members content with that proposal? Just before I come to you, I want to check something with Mark there in relation to the first one you raised, Mark, 5.2. Is that around the numbers of drop curbs or the process and how those are coordinated? Is that
the process and the approach and criteria applied to applications that I don't believe does take into account the needs of the resident?
okay? Thank you, Mark. I actually have Kathy first, Pam, and then I'll come back to yourself.
Mine is back to 5.5 on the homelessness report,
Yeah.
and it's just to say that that was such a useful session that we had, and I personally got so much out of it, and when you've seen all the work that's being done, but the struggles that the sector is facing, but it's just to this is a great report. What will we? It's just that there's use made out of this report, you know what I mean? Because there's great recommendations and stuff within it. Will this be shared with the Minister, or can we write to the Minister alongside this report, or what is the process?
It's up to the committee. So it isn't an inquiry report as such, although it has turned into something that looks like that, because committee, I think, used the term mini report or mini inquiry report. Committee can send it to the Minister and the department, seek a response on the recommendations, send it to other ministers. Committee could consider a committee motion to go to the business office and be debated in plenary, really at the mercy of the committee for the next steps with regard to recommendations once they're agreed.
Yeah. Sure, I just feel that there's so much information in there, and we got so much out of that day, and it'd be nice to see an outworking of it and something this committee actually brings something forward with it. So I'm not sure whether a motion is the way to go, or whether we share it with the minister.
Okay, we'll leave that there as food for thought at the moment. I do agree with you. I do think actually writing and asking the minister for a will he look at implementing those recommendations is useful. So, and there may be others, but I want to check with Pam, because I think we're going to have a bit more of a discussion on this. So check with Pam what's the item that you're raising, Pam?
Yes, on the report. I was a wee bit confused with this because I did raise with the clerk the membership, because normally on committee reports you would have the ins and outs of people coming in and out. I'm just aware both Kathy and myself have arrived late in the day to this committee, so it might be good to include those dates anyway.
Yep.
But yes, so this is not. Maybe we could be refreshed as to how this came about. This ended up looking like a committee report when we haven't done any inquiry or mini inquiry, and there was no agreement to do so. Just asking around the technicality of all that, and would like understand Kelly's shared more information. I think we would need some more time, regardless.
I think that's
put all this stuff together. If it could be collated, and we could talk about before we do anything further with it.
Yeah.
But
so I suppose I'll come to the clerk just in relation, but what we agreed at the end of that Skegness session was, given the focus and coherence of what we had heard in evidence that day, that we should pull it into what we described as a mini report to capture it, because it was very specific, it was very helpful, the committee felt. There were some good suggestions in there, and obviously coming from people who were very expert in terms of their engagement in that sector, and they were flagging up recommendations that they thought would help. And given the crisis in homelessness, we thought it would be useful to pull that into a report. So I'll just check with the clerk if there's anything further. Or
Yep, no, that is the genesis of it. So housing and homelessness has always been at the top of the committee's strategic priorities, and that session was dedicated to that issue, given that it was Homelessness Week. And it was a decision taken in that meeting that the committee then take all of the evidence and the follow-up information that was sought by way of correspondence and collate that into, the word mini report was used. It's not that many now, in that there's quite a lot in it, but committee can do with it whatever it wishes, really.
okay, so but I think I'll come back to Kelly now, because I know Kelly has taken a bit of time, and I think has raised some points that are well worth of considering. So Kelly, if you want to take us through that, and then what I will do is give members more. We can come back to it. We can look at amending. If we agree to amend, we can look at amending, and then take a look at bringing it back for final approval.
I've just emailed everybody. I don't appreciate this the first time you're saying it, but do you want me to go through how I've come to this? Or just the paragraphs?
I wonder should we give members time to look at Kelly's email and go back? What's the most effective time-wise in relation to this?
So grateful for all of the points, and they're brought out by paragraph.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to incorporate them, given if committee is agreed. It's evidence-based information, so there isn't any challenge with that. And members can either take the report away and have another week with it, with these additional points. With committee's agreement, we can incorporate that in, and then we can move to agree the report and the next steps next week. And it's really, is committee agreed with the draft recommendations as drafted by the team? And is there any further steps committee would want to take in terms of sending to the minister, proposing a motion to the House for debate in plenary, anything like that?
So I think it's important that we get this right, in a sense. So what I would suggest is maybe that those observations are worked into the draft, and bring the draft back, and that'll give everyone time to have a proper look at them.
We can send that out either tomorrow or with the committee bundle on Monday.
Okay. Members content, then we'll bring that back for further.
Just on that subject, if we could find out what the resourcing requirement would be to implement this strategy, and a readiness for a transition plan. How are we going to implement it, take it from where it is to where we want it to go, and will there be any performance monitoring?
Okay, well I think that work likely would, in my mind, would be more as that work the department would carry out if they agree with the recommendations. But in the first case, we would send the report to them for comment. So I think we could be getting ahead of ourselves in that sense. This is a report that this sector are flagging up. The committee have had the benefit of seeing it. We want to share it with the department and get their views, and then we could
We'll look for the money.
then look for the money. And actually some of it may save money, to be honest, if it was properly implemented. I think getting ahead of the stream is a key factor. But yes, those are all valid considerations.
It may well be that is part of our ask. If we did go to a motion, would be for the Minister to come out with a plan. But the only thing that I'd be worried about is a lot of this is housing executive. You know, they lead on the supporting people and things like that there. So maybe we might need to get that discussion with the Minister to see, is it the Minister going to tell the housing executive to do this? But the housing executive has had a lot of this stuff devolved to it. So some of it will be for them to take forward as well. Yeah. And taking Morris's point, our budgets are going to be tight for the next wee while. Yeah.
Well, that's in the spirit of taking it on a step by step basis. Let's get the report as good as we can get it. Then agreed. Then into the department and move it on. In that in that advisory role that we have as a committee to the department, I think that's the kind of spirit that we're trying to flag up this information.
A number of the committees, the draft recommendations for your consideration really flag up the cross-executive nature of the issues that were raised that day, and the fact that there's a role in terms of health and education and justice, and really given that cross-function, what other useful steps could we take with the information in terms of sending it elsewhere or seeking responses from the relevant departments?
Yeah, and very importantly, so I mean, health and education are big, certainly, and finance. Obviously, they're all major players. Go ahead.
Just to make a comment, that it does strike me as it's almost akin to like looking at primary care, and the need for the preventative and all the stuff that needs to go forward to stop people getting into those crisis scenarios. It is a huge, very, very complicated issue. And it's way more than one department for sure.
And departments absolutely need to be working together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But happy to come back to it, Chair.
Yeah, okay, and thank you, Kelly, for that. I think that's a useful piece of work, and it does draw out what was in evidence and should be added. So let's add that in and then come back and look at it then. Okay. Members content with that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
wanted to come back to Mark on the point that he raised about Korean observers.
Well, I'm going to come.
Are you going to deal with that further down?
I'm going to come to that then. So I'm going to come to that in 5.7 and 5.8. There's further information in table papers and probably more of a discussion there. In that light, can we agree that items that we have addressed items 5.2 to 5.5 and moving on to items 5. So where's 5.6? Oh yeah, 5.5. Yeah, that's included in that. Yeah. So in page 3 of table papers, members have been provided with correspondence in relation to the NI Football Fund. Item 5.7 is from the department and includes minutes from meetings held and the budget allocations. Item 5.8 is from the Minister regarding the release of papers in relation to the fund. The Minister has stated that the papers requested will not be shared at this time to reduce the potential to prejudice any future legal proceedings. So now I'll ask members for comments in relation to 5.7 and 5.8. And Morris, were you looking to?
Yeah, just to answer Mark, it's clearly about Korean. Korean have served notice of potential legal action, but they're also exploring other avenues of funding where they may be able to move forward without the football fund allocation. But that's as far as I know at the minute.
Okay, Mark, were you looking to come back in on this issue at this point? You're content. Any other comments or thoughts in relation to 5.7 or 5.8, members? Go ahead, Cal.
Just on 5.8, it's maybe more clarity for myself as well. And Kelly raised it earlier. Is it not contrary to the legal advice that stated the documents can be shared as long as a date hasn't been set in 5.8?
Yeah, I think that would be my understanding of the legal advice, to be honest. But can we reiterate that question in the letter we've already agreed to?
We have already sent a letter in those terms.
Like reply to it in that sense?
We haven't replied to this one, but
Okay.
we've sent a letter on foot of the committee's own legal advice.
Okay.
setting out that as there's no date set for proceedings yet, we would still like all of the information requested.
Okay.
We have sent that letter.
Okay.
Okay. Finally then, members, item 5.9 is a copy of the Department's accessibility guidelines and regulations for arm's length bodies. At last week's meeting, we considered a Department response regarding language used by ALBs and members requesting accessibility guidelines that were referenced in the Department's response. So, Kelly, you're indicating that?
Thank you, Chair. The answer that we've been given here isn't what was asked. They're telling us that there's websites and there's guidance on websites. We'd asked about the language that was used. So with the disability strategy coming forward, if we're going to have arm's length bodies using very out-of-date language, we have to ask what the Department is proactively doing to prevent that from happening. There's ways to say things, and using language that would have been recognised in the 1970s is not the way to do it. So it's just how, is it worthwhile going back to them and just asking again, thank you for this response? That's not what you were asked. You were asked about what guidelines on use of language, and particularly discriminatory language about disabilities. And do they have any guidance that they provide to ALBs on that?
Yep.
So we asked the specific question in those terms already, and the departmental response did clarify that they do not provide guidance on the language to be used, and that this is what they provide.
Which is not really cutting it. Okay, well, we can probably come back to this during the disability strategy piece, because it's stunning that the department that is responsible for disability and disability strategy doesn't say to people, that's not politically correct, or that's the wrong language you're using in very public documents.
And to my mind, both the Department and all ALBs that fall within the Department's remit should be exemplars and leading on this type of language, and setting proactively involving themselves in ensuring that language is reflective of best practice and sensitivity and compassion and empathy.
And it's just, Chair, just to confirm, from years with working with people with disabilities, the term handicapped, it comes from Victorian times when people who were disabled had cap in hand to get help. It's a very derogatory term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I fully agree, and I think it's something, but that may be an opportunity to come back to this, right? But it's a point very well made. Okay, members, that's matters arising concluded then, and I'm going to move on to correspondence, which is item 6 of the agenda. And as usual, we'll proceed through in smaller bundles, given that there's less than last week. I'll ask members to draw out, highlight, or seek briefings in relation to any specific item that they wish to, or if members are content to confirm the step as proposed in the memo, or amend that recommendation. Mm-hmm. So the memos at item 6.1, starting on page 67 of the pack. Item 6.2 is a correspondence from the Department with a general update on legislation arising from the Pathways to Work, reforming benefits, and Get Support to Get Britain Working green paper. And item 6.3 is a copy for the Assembly Library of the partnership agreement between DFC and the Charity Commission. So do members have any comments on 6.2 or 6.3? No, members content with the memo as drafted. Items 6.4 to 6.5, do members have any comments they wish to, or are content with the memo as drafted?
I'm very uncomfortable with 6.4, but it's not for this committee. I don't know what we do with this. I know we can note it, but the person seems to be looking for us to do something.
So we have taken, I suppose, a sort of I'll take some guidance from
Take
the
a consistent approach with most individual approaches, which is to write back and say the committee is not enabled or empowered to undertake inquiries on an individual's behalf. Or committee could ask the department or the relevant part of the department, are they aware of the issue?
I don't even think us getting involved in that way would be appropriate. I think writing back to say that it's not for
empowered.
us.
Yeah, that's consistent with what we normally do.
Yeah.
Thank you. In terms of items 6.6 to 6.8, members, are there any comments? And if I can just flag up one, item 6.7 is an invitation from NI Screen to a preview screening of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms on the 18th of January. Can I just check if any members received that as well? So, listen, whenever I seen this, I actually was really, and as of just this morning, I was really looking forward to attending, and I have already. I would have loved to attend. I wanted to check with committee that you were content to. I am a fan both of Game of Thrones, I have to say, but also of what Game of Thrones and the creative arts bring to our society. There are people in my own constituency who frequently worked on Game of Thrones, electricians and other trades, and brought all of that skill. So I think we have a really good story and a really good future here to tell in relation to this. I'd have loved to have, just as of this morning, I'm not able to go to that, so I wanted to check if any other committee member was able or willing to attend that on behalf of the committee.
I had replied I would go.
You are attending?
A fan of that program.
Okay, well listen, I would have really loved to went, but it's good, and sure you can let us know how you get on, Morris. But
We're looking for local scenery.
yeah, it's a. No, like I mean, we continue right across the island to punch away above our weight. We even see a new generation like Jessica Buckley and Paul Mescal coming through and setting the scene and winning awards. Like, and it's a. And it's not just the creativity and all of that, but there is also a very good economic and a story to tell as well with it. Okay, thank you for that, members. Item 6.8 is correspondence from the Minister in relation to the LCM on universal credit, removal of two-child limit bill. You'll recall that we considered previous correspondence on this topic at last week's meeting and received procedural advice from the Clerk Assistant in relation to the proposal in that letter. The Minister has now confirmed that he intends to lay a legislative consent memorandum before the Assembly in, to quote, in due course. So in light of having now received this letter, our members agreed that we amend our letters to the Department and Speaker with the agreed actions from last week to reflect the updated approach but emphasise the need to act in line with Standing Order 42A. Yep, Shannon?
Yeah, more than happy that's I suppose just it's on the cards. I'm slightly concerned just whether the systems are ready for an April implementation, and I think the fact that I've asked written questions asking for the data, still haven't got it, and the department have been working on this obviously since it was announced. It's just between the green paper and potential reform of benefits. We had this exact same issue, constantly asking for data, constantly asking for how will this impact in Northern Ireland, and we're getting back, the department is working on that. The department doesn't have those figures ready yet, and I'm just wondering, when will we actually see the outworkings of this? I've asked a few times in terms of how this will impact, particularly larger families who might be impacted by the benefit cap, all of that. We need to know how much our mitigations package is going to increase by, if it is going to increase by, and those questions from Kevin Higgins and Advice NI, the sector are looking for that information too, and I have a real concern that we as the committee are not furnished with the data that we need to scrutinise the changes that are going to be coming into place in 2.5 months.
Or indeed you wonder even to the department, and I share your concern, but I think it's becoming an increasing concern around the lag or the lack of information on the impact, and therefore any potential way to mitigate or address those concerns.
Do we have a data collection problem?
It seems like there's a gap between the data. That does seem, and I think we're coming to a situation where we're going to have to consider how we look at this as a more systemic thing rather than a case by case or an issue by issue matter. Kelly?
Yeah, it's just to confirm and agree with Shannon on this. We have a system coming up, and if there are people who are going to now, because of the limit being changed, going to maybe fall outside of the mitigations process, what are we going to do about that? How are we empowering the advice sector to help these people? What's the information going out? There's a knock-on effect of not having the information provided in advance, because this will move upstream. This will actually be affecting families. And how do we support those families? Have we cut, or are we going to give the independent advice sector enough money to be able to cope with the numbers that we don't know how many that might be? So it's causing difficulties now. I appreciate that the LCM is only on the papers here today. We're being told about it and it will come forward, but the department must be working on this. They must know their figures. I got a response back from the Minister this week about how much welfare mitigation amounts did he bid for, or did he put in his proposals. Now, it's not confirmed, obviously, because the budget isn't signed off. So the Minister has figures there of what he was expecting to spend on mitigations. What's that based on? You know, we know about we've known since last year, about the end of last year, about the two-child UC limit, you know.
So do you have a proposal, Sean, in relation to that concern? I think this concern's valid. What would your proposal be?
I mean, I'm happy to not send something off this week if we think that we're going to get some information in, you know, potentially next week if or when the LCM is put forward. But it's something that I've been aware of for a wee while. So I'm happy to pause it to see if we do get the information next week or the week after when the LCM comes through, but it needs to come through as quickly as possible.
Well, should we then ask for a briefing from officials at the earliest possible opportunity, and preferably prior to the laying of the memorandum in the business office?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very aware of what we said last week in terms of our workload and what we're sending through. So that's why I didn't want to make a proposal, but I think if we could get a briefing, it would be really, really useful.
Yeah. Members content? Okay, Kelly.
Chair, sorry, can I go back to 6.6? It's the CEF, Construction Employers Federation's response to the budget. Can I take us to page 216? Excuse me, of their comments. It would be really useful, I think, for us as a committee. At the top of 216, the second paragraph, they talk about the infrastructure challenges and they have put forward solutions. Could we write to two other committees, Infrastructure and Economy, to ask for what their opinion is of that paragraph and the report? I just think that when we want cross-departmental working, and it's very clear here from CEF, cross-departmental working is needed, very much needed, to deal with the issues in order for us to be able to build enough houses. And it's just something there that we need to find out what the others are doing with this. What do they think about this? Have they had a discussion about it? And then on 217 of the same report, the early earmarking of RRI funding for Northern Ireland Water and new build housing is an important step. Like, it talks there about there's a shortfall of 1.36 billion. Now, it's not for us to talk too much about Northern Ireland Water because that's not within our remit here, but housing is, and that is scary when we think about how the housing supply strategy and the number of social homes that are desperately needed, and we now have new figures out of how many people are on the social housing waiting lists and the length of time. Like, for many, you'll have a child that's born and they'll be in primary school before their family will get a home. It's 4 years. So it's asking those committees, have they looked at this and what is their response to that, and are they aware of any cross-departmental working that's taking place?
Have they received any response?
Or have they a response? What's their commentary, those committees' commentaries on this paper? A lot of it is outside of our remit, but it has a massive impact. You know, like they go on in 219 to talk about it's a surprise that the draft budget doesn't identify any funding streams for retrofitting. You know, that flies in the face of what the Minister is hoping to achieve with social housing.
Yep. Okay, members content we ask for the opinions? Yeah.
Just to ask those committees what they're doing, yeah.
You
Or what they
clear
think
enough?
about this.
Economy and infrastructure, yes, I have those points, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just if we move on, I think you could be a wee bit more forceful in infrastructure, not having the infrastructure in place to allow housing schemes that have already been passed at the planning stage to continue and to progress, because there isn't the infrastructure in place to cope with the houses that they want to build. So it does impact on us.
Yeah, no, there's no question. It has a knock on, and is having a huge impact on housing and on addressing that housing need. No question about that. Okay, members content with that. You've also, members, been provided with a table correspondence memo, page 72, with a further item of correspondence, and Item 6.10 then is the 53rd report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules, with no rules for this committee subject to specific comment. So do members have any final comments or questions, or are content with the relationship bundle in the memo? Yep, thank you. So moving on then, members, to agenda item 7, SR 2026/2, the Housing Benefit and Universal Credit Housing Costs, Executive Determination, Modification Regulations 2026. A copy of the SR is at page 229. Members, the committee considered the SL1 at our meeting on the 11th of December 2025, when we were content for the department to proceed to make the rule. Have members any objection to the rule? No. Can I then put the formal question that SR 2026/2, the Housing Benefit and Universal Credit Housing Costs, Executive Determination, so this is moving, so no members have no objection to the rule.
So,
Go ahead, Mark, are you looking to make a comment?
no, I was just going to say it has reflected that concerns had been raised by members, and I think it's fair to say that none of us are particularly content with the rule, but that it is what it is, and there's not much we can do about it, unfortunately.
Okay then, so just to formally ask committee, SR 2026/2, the Housing Benefit and Universal Credit Housing Costs, Executive Determinations, Modification Regulations 2026, and the committee has no objection to the rule, subject to the report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Are members agreed? Yeah. Agenda item 8.
Chair, sorry, just before we move on that, I believe that, right, we have a freeze in the LHA at the minute, and we have rents are going up. Is there any way that we could get something back from either the Housing Executive, or if Louise could do a paper on the differences now between the LHA rate and what the actual rents are broken down across Northern Ireland? Because the longer this I know we had it frozen for 3 years, and then it was unfrozen for a year, and now it's frozen again. I don't think the realism, I don't know, in all of the budget problems that are coming forward, if we have enough discretionary housing support to help people. So it would be useful to know the LHA across Northern Ireland and the average rents in those areas.
Maybe it would raise be the...
I don't know whether it be Raise or the Housing Executive.
I suppose we could check if the Housing
Liaise
Executive
with
have the information in the first
liaise
instance.
with both.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Members agreed with that approach, yeah. So moving on to agenda item 8 then, SR 2026/4, the Universal Credit Transitional Provisions Amendment Regulations 2026, a copy of the SR is at page 242. So members, we considered this SL1 at our meeting on the 8th of January, when we were content for the department to proceed to make the rule. However, members, you will also recall that when we considered the SL1 last week, we also agreed to request the law centre's views in relation to transitional provisions, and we have requested a briefing from the department on the breakdown of transitional provisions and the move to universal credit. So do members have any objection to the rule? No. So then can I put the formal question that in relation to SR 2026/4, the Universal Credit Transitional Provisions Amendment Regulations NI 2026, and the committee has considered and has no objection to the rule, subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Are members agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 9 then, members, is departmental, our first briefing session, departmental evidence in relation to the review of the rates support grant. So members, the briefing paper for this agenda item is at page 252, and I now like to welcome the following officials to the meeting.
Pause 1 second till we get the officials in the room. There we go.
So, thank you. Okay, members, now I'd like to welcome the following officials to the meeting. We have Gerard Murray, Gerard's Director of Local Government and Housing Regulation Division in the Department for Communities, and Jeff Glass, and Jeff is Head of Local Government Finance Branch in Department for Communities. So Gerard, I think it's yourself maybe is going to make a brief opening statement, and then we'll move to questions from members. Thank you, Gerard.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'm hoping just to give you a bit of background information on the review and the rate support grant itself, and then obviously open up for questions, and we're happy to delve into whatever you want us to get into. So I'm Gerard Murray, as the Chair has said, a Director of Local Government and Housing Regulation Division, and Jeff Glass is joining me here. So thank you for the opportunity to provide a bit more information on the review to the committee today. So in terms of the rate support grant itself, Section 27 of the Local Government Finance Act 2011 provides the Department with the power to provide an annual rate support grant to councils. The formula for calculating the amount of the grant is set out in regulations, and that's the Local Government Rate Support Grant Regulations 2011. The policy intent behind the rate support grant is to annually provide councils whose needs exceed their wealth relative to other councils in NI with some additional support. 7 out of the 11 councils currently receive a grant under the rate support grant. So the funding that's available for the grant is obviously in the context of the department's overall budget and the challenging circumstances that have been involved there, certainly in the 25-26 financial year. The grant itself is discretionary. The grant is statutory, but the amount is discretionary. And it's not ring-fenced. And again, it has to be considered in the context of the wider budget availability. So there are no conditions attached to it. Therefore, councils are free to allocate that funding against priorities within the council and indeed any particular services that need additional funding. It's worth mentioning that the grant itself was subject to a judicial review in relation to the 22-23 allocation that the department made to it. That was covered areas such as equality, rural proofing and the consultation process. So the judgment in relation to the judicial review was handed down by the court on the 27th of March 25. The council was successful on one of those grounds, and that related to the department's need to have due regard to rural needs and really about the timing of the rural needs impact assessment process. So the council's claims were dismissed on the grounds relating to irrationality, equality and consultation. So as part of the lessons learned in response to that, the Deputy Secretary responsible for Communities, Place and Local Government shared the findings of the judicial review with Deputy Secretary colleagues across the department and also with DOF colleagues to ensure that those lessons were learned and to highlight some of the key learning for the department in relation to the need to undertake a rural needs impact assessment before budget decisions are finalised and where a business area is developing, adopting, implementing or revising policies and plans and designing and delivering public services. So in terms of the review itself then, the department commissioned what is now called Innovation Consultancy Service, which used to be called Business Consultancy Service, you'll see from the report itself, to review the rate support grant mechanisms and formula to assess its continued relevance and effectiveness in supporting district councils across NI. So the review aimed to determine if the rate support grant continues to meet its original policy intent and to evaluate the grant's alignment with other funding streams, its use in service delivery and the robustness of the data and criteria underpinning allocations. So the ICS, Innovation Consultancy Service, which is part of the DOF, met the brief in full, and the conclusions and recommendations from the report have already been shared with the committee and stakeholders, including NILGA and SOLAS. So the review overall found that the rate support grant remains relevant and necessary, particularly with councils with lower wealth and higher need. However, there were some recommendations in relation to the data sources that fed into the calculations of the allocation for each council. So there were 11 recommendations, and the department has accepted 10 of those. The department did not accept recommendation 10, which related to agreeing a minimum rate support grant allocation set over a multi-year period. And that is obviously because the amount that can be allocated is dependent on the budget outcome. But however, the department did note the efforts to move towards a multi-year budget. So I'll not go through all of the recommendations, but I'm happy to delve into that. Some other points to note from the committee, just that you may be interested in. So in terms of consultation with rural councils to understand needs, there were no specific recommendations in relation to that coming out of the review. However, as part of the review itself, ICS did engage with all of the councils, and since the 22-23 year, the department has completed a rural needs impact assessment in relation to the rate support grant. And one of the recommendations relates to regulations that we need to bring forward to update the data sources that are used, and we would be undertaking a rural needs impact assessment in relation to that. And you may be aware that the formula itself for calculating the allocations considers rural aspects in terms of sparsity and additional expenditure that's required in some councils for some of those services. So in terms of the overall financial position for the grant, it has been reduced over the last 7 years or so, but has been steady at 3.124 million in the current financial year and the year before. So overall then, in terms of the review, the conclusion was that it continues to serve its intended purpose, but some modernisation is required to ensure it remains effective and relevant. Touched on the legislative requirements, improved data quality and clearer reporting, and obviously the points made around a multi-year budget. So we are continuing to work with councils and other stakeholders at the minute to implement the recommendations that have been accepted, and that kind of covers the intro, so happy to delve into any areas. Gerard. Okay,
thank you, Gerard. As important issue, yes, I know, like in terms of my own part of in relation to, say, for example, from Allen District Council, Mid-Ulster District Council, with a much smaller ratepayer base, all of these things have a huge impact on them. I suppose I would just also note that while it sounds great about staying steady, that in effect, given some of the inflationary pressure we've seen, staying steady means in effect a cut, and that's very difficult for those councils with that smaller base. I do understand that the review has focused on the formula and the mechanism rather than on the quantum of funding itself, and we recognise that the support is discretionary in terms of the amount, and intended to take account of the relative wealth, and that's clearly enough set out. So, also glad that the department has accepted 10 of the 11 recommendations, but obviously that one is key, the quantum and the funding. I know other colleagues will have questions around some of that, so I'll leave that at that. But in relation to my own questions, they're focused really on engagement. So I'd like to know what engagement has taken place with councils since those recommendations were accepted, what the next steps are in terms of implementation, and how will councils continue to be involved as this progresses.
Yeah, we certainly do intend to continue to engage with councils as the recommendations are implemented. Some of them were internal in nature, Chair, in terms of engaging with our analytics colleagues, and we've done that and completed those recommendations. There's a letter just in final draft form that's going to go out from me within the next few days to council chiefs in relation to some of the issues around how we articulate the value of the investment in the grant, because there was some commentary in relation to not being able to specify exactly what it's used on, and that's around how councils actually put together their budget for the year, and they use the additional income from the grant almost as an overall addition, which helps to keep, I suppose, in those councils the rates lower than they might well have been had they not had the grant. So we need to work with councils around that to make sure that we can develop a way of articulating better the value that the grant delivers. So we'll be engaging with councils in the weeks and months ahead in relation to those specific recommendations.
Yeah, I think that is really important. It's a recurring theme within this committee around the potential that councils have to act as partners here in delivery in terms of housing anti-poverty strategy, and we are doing some further work on that. So I just think it's crucial that they are provided, and given that some of the deepest pockets of poverty can be within those very rural areas. It's important that we see that levelling process working effectively. So I'd be very strongly in favour of that. But I'm going to come first of all to our Deputy Chair, Cathy Mason, and then I'm coming to Kelly and Melissa. So go ahead.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much for your briefing. I, like many other colleagues here, have come from local government and started my political journey there, so I'm really, really conscious of the pressure that councils face, particularly in those rural areas, and I think that's where I kind of want to focus on. I know we're talking about the review, but around that JR that took place, now I appreciate that was 22-23, and I know that these rural assessment needs have taken place since that, but I'd like to try and maybe get an understanding of how that rural need is now actually being assessed and how that links to how that influences, I suppose, the rate that the support grant allocation is granted.
Yeah, so I suppose the rural needs impact assessment that's undertaken hasn't identified any, disproportionate impact. But I think where the grant allocation, is tilted towards rural communities is in that formula. So it might not be overly complicated for some people, but it is a tricky enough formula. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the regulations at all, but it does take into account, it's weighted. So obviously there's the wealth versus needs is the biggest factor in calculating the allocations, but then it's weighted for deprivation, additional population sparsity, and then in terms of what a council's expenditure is. So if you have a rural council that spends more on waste collection, because of the geographic spread, that will show in terms of the proportion of the council's budget that's spent on that, and that then provides a weighting to that particular council. Okay. So there is a process of trying to provide councils with a better proportion of the available budget based on those needs. Okay. And it's worth having a look at that, but I'm always happy to receive any suggestions or commentary in relation to that. We will be looking at the regulations and having to make a change because the data that's used to inform that was based on, I think it was 2010, Jeff. So that was unfortunately specified in the legislation. So in order to use more up-to-date data that will inform that, we need to go in and make a legislative amendment. So we'll be doing that. Right,
okay. And I assume it takes into consideration the fact that the more rural councils, and I'm supposed being parochial here and thinking of my own council area in Uri Morning Down as well, have more difficulties in raising revenue themselves. Is that taken into consideration?
Yeah. So that's where the wealth part of it comes in.
Okay.
So it's based on the domestic and non-domestic rate collection. So councils that have lower levels of population, lower levels of industry, economic activity, business, then that's how that will be fed through. So that's the main part of the calculation that would be used, and we would use DOF rating information to inform that calculation.
And then just moving forward, and it links back to sort of what the chair was mentioning there as well, how can councils be reassured that, and especially those big rural areas, that this, especially now looking into multi-year budgets and things like that as well, that this is they are going to see improvements out of this?
Yeah, I think in terms of the multi-year budget dimension, I think we would all welcome if we were able to get to that position. Yeah. And the committee will be aware of some of the challenges with getting there. Yeah. But the grant that's available for this will be dependent on the budget that the final settlement that the department gets, and then there will be decisions that will have to be taken by the minister at that point in relation to how that budget is allocated across the various priorities within the department. So the budget is out for consultation at the moment, and we have to wait to see how all that process works out, and then those decisions would need to be taken as once we know what the department's allocation is.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
And can you just check and follow up to the Deputy Chair's question there? When will the committee see the legislative changes that you have mentioned there, and how will the committee be involved in that?
Yeah, absolutely. We intend to engage with the committee in relation to scrutinising those regulations, and I think we're hoping that will be in the next financial year. There is a small technical issue, Chair, that could mean that we need to make a primary legislative amendment, but we're exploring that with departmental Solicitor's Office at the moment to bottom that issue out. I'm hoping it won't need that, so that we can make it by subordinate legislation.
Okay, thank you. Kelly?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the report. It was very useful. What I wanted to ask about is the rural needs impact assessments. When they're applied, are they applied to all councils, including the councils who will be in receipt of RSG?
So it's applied at the grant level, you know. So in relation to the grant, so for example, if we were to make a change to how we're delivering the grant in the next year, then we would have to apply that and try to determine whether or not that has an adverse impact on rural communities.
So the councils that are not currently in receipt, there's no consideration of their rural impact assessment?
Well, it would be at a grant level. So because those councils will be, you know, if you're starting the year and you're working out what their need is compared to wealth, you know, you can't guarantee that won't have changed. So that calculation is made each time.
Okay.
So if there is a council there that's more urban in nature and becomes more rural, it could possibly theoretically come into play there, and then the impact assessment would also apply there. In terms of the other councils, I suppose it's the equality impact assessment on the department's overall budget that would cover everything.
There's only been 7 councils have got the rate support grant since 2015, since we moved to
well, I'm just thinking, I'm Strangford constituency. I have the joy of 4 different councils hitting into my area. Newry, Morningdown, the same as Cathy, and Ards and North Down. And I'm just very aware Ards and North Down is comparatively a smaller area. It's more wealthy, but there are pockets of rural deprivation there. And sometimes I think that this causes problems because people automatically assume you've got Bangor and you're Ards, you're grand. Not always. Which brings me to my next question. You talked about the rural impact assessment, and you look at it and you've seen, thankfully, that there has been no proportionate impact. However, I look at access to services that are provided by councils, the amount of money that they're receiving, and you talked about the grant doesn't say what councils could spend the money on. But I have to say, the lack of local development plans, the amount some councils are holding up planning applications, you know, and they haven't really gone far enough as far as I'm concerned about dealing with their planning waiting lists. I'm just wondering, is there any consideration by the department at this stage of looking at those councils and saying, guys, local development plans are causing problems for the Minister's housing supply strategy, they're causing problems for what investment you could potentially be going for elsewhere. Is there any sort of consideration of some sort of guidance to councils of what they should be prioritising?
So I suppose the rate support grant is intended to try to address the wealth disparity between councils. That's its purpose. The issues around local development plans and the community planning process are a slightly different issue.
It's just, we know that a kickstart for the economy in any area is building, and the councils are actually holding that back a bit.
Well, I don't want to delve into an area of another department's policy responsibility, but I do have community planning within my brief, but planning policy sits within another department, and I know there's a programme of work that's ongoing in relation to trying to improve planning outcomes, and that obviously involves council's roles within that. And coming from a regeneration background in my previous role, I'm very familiar with the difficulties that there can be, and in terms of development, in terms of housing delivery and all those things. But it's a difficult one because there's a balance, I suppose, between providing councils with the necessary authority to determine what its priorities are within its district, and the department trying to influence that, I suppose. So up to now, the rate support grant has been used by the councils to focus on it's more about service delivery, I think, than bigger issues such as planning and local development planning.
Just the reason why I'm asking is because we as a scrutiny committee challenge the department all the time to not work in a silo and to work across, and we would like to see our council partners do the same. But if they're being given a block of money, now I appreciate the RSG maybe isn't the solution to this, but they've been given a block of money, but we sort of need them to be tying into our programme for government so that we have that cross-departmental, cross-organisational objective achievement.
Absolutely. And I think I don't necessarily see this as the vehicle for that, but I absolutely agree with the points that you're making. And within my other area, community planning, it's something that we're looking at. our current relationships with local government that are some of the touch points through the permanent secretary solus groupings and the partnership panels, and those areas are where we have those relationships with local government. And I agree, and we have been looking at how we can, I suppose, better enhance those relationships and get better collaboration. But again, harking back to my previous role in terms of regeneration, the partnership working there between central and local government has been excellent in my experience. And you know, certainly in Ards and North Down, you see things like Queen's Parade where we've been able to get that started, and we've seen some excellent work on city deals across the different council areas. So the example is there and it can be done. It needs everyone to kind of work collectively to try to achieve better outcomes there. And I think everyone, you know, in my experience, are willing partners with that. It's not always easy, but it's definitely something we're trying to do.
Thank you. I'm just conscious we are pushing on the time envelope a bit, and we have the Melissa, Mark, and Sean still to come in this item. So I'll go now to yourself, Melissa.
Watch your overleg, because that's the just basically and ratchets. It's nice to listen to the statement in itself to get a wee bit of explanation that in relation to it too. Being a former councillor, I'm only too well aware of the difficulties with in setting rates and so on, a process that they're going through now at the present time. And in particular, the area, and all at the end of the day, representatives are local in this way, that I represent, Derry City and Staban, we depended heavily on the rates relief grant that we've received each and every year. And we're only too well aware of the way it has been reduced over this last number of years as well too, in order to allow us to continue to provide our services in whilst we have a city in the northwest region, yet and all at the same time the greater part of the services we attempt to deliver again is to a rural community. I think it's something like 40% of it roughly in total. And in that respect, it concerns me probably the two areas that haven't been accepted, i.e. that in order to allow council to sit down and implement its own rates and so on, they need to have some clarity in terms of, we'll say, the amount of resource that they are to receive through the rates relief grant in itself. And I know that you say that, okay, it's subject to the likes of the budget and so on, but at the end of the day too, like that we know that you are committed to a budget as such, and as such I think that they should at least have a minimum level there that they could indicate to councils that would allow them to plan for the future. And just a second question then in relation to that as well too, and I know that it's very topical at the present time that we chat about the multi-year budgets and so on, and maybe the likelihood of that actually happening, but in the event of there being agreement in relation to a multi-year budget, will councils be able to utilise, we'll say, the benefit of that, thus the ratepayers in turn benefiting from it as well too?
Yeah, in terms of the first question, unfortunately, you know, we wouldn't be able to give any guarantee about a minimum level of funding at this stage. But what we do is to try to work, and Jeff engages regularly with the finance officers in each of the councils to try to keep them up to date in terms of what we know around the budget and the potential allocation. We're not always in a position to provide any firm figures, but in terms of trying to inform their planning assumptions, we do try to help them with that as far as we can.
Yep, I've told them that for 26-27 they should base it on the current budget and no more. And then also we've sent them out, all the councils have got their percentage allocation, so they will know if whatever the figure is, what their percentage of rate support grant will be. So that's been sent out to them already, so that should help them with, you know, as they're looking to strike their rates in February, so that information is out there with them.
So, I mean, obviously we need to heavily caveat that it's only when this is to help with their planning assumptions, but it's only when we have a firm budget allocation for the department and the Minister has made his decisions in relation to how that budget is allocated, will we be able to confirm that. The challenge for our colleagues in the Council is the timing of that, and the timing of that vis-a-vis the rate setting process, and we understand that, and we do try to help as much as we can. In relation to the multi-year budget, If there was a multi-year budget agreed by the executive, then I suppose ministers in theory could provide some more clarity in terms of future years, but those decisions are entirely for the minister, and I wouldn't want to get ahead of any of that.
Thank you. Thank you. Mark, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to the gents for coming along with this report or review. And I'm not being critical of the review per se, or certainly not of the individuals who've come here with it. But the focus of it is really how we cut the pie, whereas the real concern that councils have has been the size of the pie. And I know there's been shrinkflation around a lot of food stuffs of late, and rate support grant is no different in that regard. So I suppose that recommendation 10 that Melissa had referred to previously, without the acceptance of it, this report or the recommendations in it will do little or nothing to dispel the uncertainty faced by councils, or the unfairness faced by ratepayers within those councils, and the difficulties that they've had to endure as a result of cuts applied to the cut. Now, I'm from quite a way away from Melissa, but we share a common council area, and I believe that Derry City and Strabane District Council has submitted a detailed paper in relation to rate support grant in the context of the wider rating system. And that report, I'm not sure, I think you are familiar with it, but it demonstrates that without appropriate policy intervention, ratepayers in those less wealthy and more deprived and more rural councils will pay and continue to pay a higher proportion of their property values in rates. And this is clearly unfair. And it's how it ties into the wider rating context. So I wonder what sort of relationship there is between DFC and Department of Finance in that regard. Because if we look at the proposals from the Minister of Finance, and there'd been a consultation on this, and I don't disagree with them, but around lifting the rate cap, for instance, on the higher value homes, the vast majority of them will be or are in the more affluent council areas. So you're actually going to then be swelling the coffers of the council, those councils, and actually increasing the disparity that increases between councils. So what sort of input does DFC have to those policy proposals from Department of Finance?
Well, I would say the rating policy per se is the responsibility of the Department for Finance. I'm not sure, Jeff, if we had any direct engagement on.
Yes, the report that came in from Derry City and Strabane, that was sent to ourselves, and we have shared that, or when I say we, the Minister has shared that with his Finance Minister. So, because as Gerard said, they have responsibility for rating policy, so that report that Derry City and Strabane provided has now been shared with DOF.
Okay, yeah, I know they're keen to engage with the Communities Minister, but the wider executive on this issue. So it's important maybe we as a committee try and establish how that's been taken forward. As regards the issue, and it reads almost as a criticism, I don't know if that's intended or not, it probably isn't, of councils that they were unable to specify how the rate support grant is being spent. Is that not just a case of it being spent on everything and cuts to it? I suppose potentially impacting on anything, and putting councillors in that sort of invidious annual position of having to decide where to make the cut, or how much more they can squeeze out of the ratepayers to minimise the cuts that need made.
Yeah, it's an important point, and that's why we need to engage with councils on that. I think there were some views that we should be able to specify exactly or understand exactly what councils have spent the grant on. But in my view, there's a danger of it being cosmetic in nature, because, for example, those councils that need to spend more money on waste collection, if we were to say you need to spend this grant on waste collection, it's a wee bit cosmetic, because you could allocate it against the waste collection expenditure, but then, the other expenditure areas, are increased then, if you know what I mean. So, but I think it's more a question of understanding the value of it overall. So, one of the benefits of it is that in those councils that benefit from the most of the grant. So, Derry City and Strabane District Council, I think, is the biggest beneficiary of it. It's to understand the value of it and what that does in terms of the rates. So all of the ratepayers within that council area will benefit, and I know it's a small percentage of the overall expenditure and budget within each council area, but all of the council ratepayers will benefit from that, I suppose, in terms of the allocation going to the overall budget, which will keep rates down so that they can meet that expenditure on public services.
Yeah, well, I know you use the term beneficiary or benefiting from, but the policy and intent behind this is to close the gap. So people that the areas receiving most are those who need the most, and sadly currently they're not receiving anywhere near enough. And I think that's reflected in, we'd seen what the department were bidding for in the budget, and I know in that I'd seen for rate support grant, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, there was an aspiration or a hope or ambition to set that at maybe over 12 million per year over the 3
well, I think it
years.
was an additional 12 million. So we were trying to bring it back up to 15.5 million, which was the kind of level in previous years. But you know as well as everyone around this table knows the challenges with the budget. So we have been, the department has been bidding for it in year during the current financial year, and also as part of the budget exercise. So we have been trying to secure additional budget for the rate support grant.
Yeah, which shows that you guys, or well, the department clearly recognise that the pie needs to be a hell of a lot bigger. But it is important, I suppose, that we as a committee do everything we can to support the department and the minister in terms of his case being made to the executive, because the impact of this continues to be harsh on councils, and I fear as long as this is vulnerable to cuts, it'll be the kind of the first place, or one of the first places that any minister goes to make them. It really ought to be earmarked expenditure in our view. Okay, but thank you, mate.
Thank you, Mark and Sean.
Thank you. Most of my questions have been answered. One of them was just around that, the allocation time, budget allocation and rate set, and whether that was where a bit of the tension was. The other question I just wanted to ask is around the recommendations and whether there's an implementation timeline. Has the department prioritised any of the accepted recommendations, or are they all being treated with the same urgency and importance?
I think we would regard them all as equally important. The time frame really depends on the nature of the recommendation. So those recommendations were, it's about engaging with our colleagues, in data and in the analytics division within the department. We've done that. The legislation recommendation I've touched on as well. In terms of a realistic time frame for that, that's looking at the next financial year. The other recommendations in relation to engaging with councils on some of those things about how the funding is used, we're taking forward now. We'll be writing out and we'll be engaging with councils over the next weeks and months on those. So we're taking the recommendations forward, the implementation plan, as quickly as possible. So.
Thank you, Sean. And Pam,
Thank you,
brief
Chair.
one, please.
Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting report. I just want to ask around the councils who are not in receipt of RSG. And I say one was my own council of Antrim Newton Abbey. But can you talk to us about have any of those 4 councils who are not in receipt been in receipt in the past?
Since 2015, it's been the same.
It has been the same?
Yeah, it's been the same 7 councils.
Okay, so that was my question really, was if any of those had been received in the past and had come out of it with that calculation with the wealth versus need, to give any indication of how things can be improved. It's clearly very difficult. The rural needs are a huge issue, and I think we all understand that. economies of scale and all the rest of it, and
The
covering
calculation-
vast
yep.
geographical areas is always going to be a challenge. So
The calculations worked out every year, so to see about the wealth versus needs. So if there's a council needs exceed their wealth, they would come into it. So if none of the 4 councils don't get it at the minute have come into that category.
okay, and I presume those 4 are not likely. Are you seeing an indication that they could possibly come into the?
There's a lot more detail in the report, in the review around, I think it starts off around page 31, 32, that looks in greater detail at how the formula has applied and the implications for the different councils. I don't know off the top of my head, I could run through it here, but in there you'll see how your council area or any other council area that you're interested in, how close it is and how it's benefited. So you could kind of look at that to see how close it is. I think in theory it's possible for councils to come into play here. It may be unlikely depending on how close it is in that calculation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, listen, I want to thank both yourself, Gerard and Jeff. It is a very significant issue, I have to say. It's one that is about equality and levelling and a very important mechanism in that sense. But I appreciate the report. I appreciate the engagement with members today. Very clear and knowledgeable answers in relation to, might not always have been the answer members wanted, but it was always certainly based on knowledge. And I suppose just my parting words would be that essential need to continue to engage with the council. I know you have indicated that, and I would very much support that. And I think that's a key part of it going forward. But thank you for your evidence. We'll take a look if there are any follow-up actions. But thank you for appearing today.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, members, can I check if there's any follow-up actions the members want to indicate in relation to that session? No. Members content we move on then. We'll go on to our next evidence session. Mark, will you indicate now? Go ahead, Mark.
Chair, it referred to a paper submitted and the officials acknowledged receipt of it, and it had been passed on to both the Communities Minister and Finance as well. If maybe we could just do some follow-up in terms of seeing what follow-up there will be to that.
Yep.
Asking department or DOF, asking
Yeah,
DFC.
but both just saying, are you going to engage? It came from Derry City and Strabane District Council. I'm sure other councils will come along with them in that. But I do think it's very important that the case is made not just to the Communities Minister, but to Finance first and foremost, but to the wider executive too.
Okay, members content we follow up in that regard?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Okay, members, so we're moving on then to agenda item 9, agenda item 10, which is oral evidence from the Equality Commission in relation to the equality review of the governance practices and procedures applicable to Ulster Boxing. So members will recall the committee previously sought to hear directly from the Equality Commission in relation to its report titled An Equality Review of the Governance Practices and Procedures Applicable to Ulster Boxing. Relating to this agenda item, there's papers at page 367. So can I now welcome the following to the meeting. So we are joined by Geraldine McGahey, who's Chief Commissioner with the Equality Commission, Louise Conlon, Chief Executive in the Equality Commission, and Alden, Henderson, Director of Advice and Compliance, Equality Commission, NI. Geraldine, can I come to yourself to make a brief opening statement, and then we'll move to questions from members.
Indeed, thank you very much, and good morning, members and Chair. I know you've had a very busy morning, but thank you really for the invitation to come along and talk about this this report that we have published. And as you've said, I'm accompanied by our Chief Executive, Louise Conlon, and our Director of Advice and Compliance, Alden Henderson. So, just by way of introduction, the Commission was asked to carry out this review as part of the mediated settlement between Darrell Clark and Ulster Boxing Council and the Irish Athletic Boxing Association, and we were not directly involved in that particular case. The terms of the mediated settlement stipulated that the Commission should conduct a comprehensive equality review of the governance, practices and procedures applicable to the Ulster Boxing Council to ensure that they are compliant with the Fair Employment and Treatment Northern Ireland Order 1998 and any relevant codes of practice, But the terms also required that we take into account representation of all of the parties, previous reviews, reports and recommendations conducted by independent bodies concerning boxing in Northern Ireland over the years. I must stress that the Commission's review does not make findings of discrimination or determine liability, nor does it seek to revisit any individual dispute. Its purpose was to examine whether the governance, practices and procedures of Ulster Boxing are structured in a way that actively promotes equality of opportunity. And I would really wish to publicly put on record and acknowledge the willingness of the various parties who engaged with the Commission in relation to this review, including representatives from Ulster Boxing, the Irish Athletic Boxing Association, the staff of Sport NI and the coaches from the various boxing clubs, because without their participation and engagement, it simply would not have been possible for us to have carried out such a comprehensive review. Throughout our consultations, I must stress as well that it is clear that those involved in the sport share common ambitions for success and are dedicated to advancing boxing as a whole. There is strong evidence of the meaningful work boxing clubs do to promote good relations within their communities. The positive influence of the Ulster Boxing Council on community relations has been well documented in the 2013 Independent Working Group report. But as we are all aware, allegations of sectarianism in boxing in Northern Ireland have existed for some time, as highlighted by the Sandy Row Amateur Boxing Club report of 2012. And subsequent recommendations issued by the Independent Working Group to improve cross-community relations back in 2013. The Ulster Boxing Council and the Irish Athletic Boxing Association committed to implementing these recommendations with the support of Sport NI, and it was reported that they were completed in 2016. Unfortunately, further issues were raised in two separate legal actions concerning participation at elite levels of boxing in Ulster. In 2018, the Commission supported Louise Crocker to pursue his discrimination case taken under the Fair Employment and Treatment Order against Ulster Boxing Council. That case was settled out of court, and the Ulster Boxing Council assured the Commission that they introduced new policies, practice and procedures to ensure compliance in all respects of its obligations. However, approximately 6 years later, in 2024, Darrell Clark commenced legal proceedings against the Ulster Boxing Council. His case was taken on grounds very similar to that of Louise Crocker. This was a disappointing development, and as previously stated, while the Commission was not directly involved in Darrell Clark's case, we did agree to carry out this review as part of the settlement terms. Our review focused on three interconnected areas. First of all, access to elite training and selection, including how athletes and coaches progress to elite pathways and major competitions. Secondly, the promotion of a good and harmonious environment at interclub and championship events. And thirdly, club access to support and development, including pathways to coaching, officiating and governance roles. But before outlining our findings, I think it's important that we acknowledge that boxing in Ulster has a long and proud tradition of cross-community participation. During our most difficult decades, boxing clubs have often remained among the few genuinely shared spaces. And that commitment to inclusion continues today. We saw strong evidence of the positive work clubs do for community relations. This review should be read as supporting that work and absolutely not trying to undermine it. That said, our review identifies a number of areas that, if addressed, will increase confidence in the administration of boxing and provide support in dealing with the challenges that currently exist. And turning to our findings, in relation to elite selection and pathways, we find that selection criteria are not consistently documented, published or communicated in advance. While explanations can be given verbally when queried, this approach could be disadvantaged newer and smaller clubs who do not have the same historical knowledge or informal networks as longer established clubs do. In equality terms, reliance on informal processes create a risk that access is not experienced as fair, transparent, or based solely on merit. In relation to the promotion of a good and harmonious environment, we find that issues identified over a decade ago remain live. The display of flags, emblems and colours, and the choice of venues, and indeed the absence of a consistent reporting mechanism, continue to cause concern. Although rules exist within the Association's handbook, we find no evidence of a structured system for recording, monitoring and reviewing incidents and complaints. Draft policies on flags, emblems, social media and reporting discriminatory conduct were all prepared in 2016, but don't seem to have been implemented. Clear, consistently enforced standards will support clubs to manage what can often be difficult and sensitive issues to navigate. On the third aspect of the review, that is club development and governance, we find that while opportunities for training and progression do exist, uptake is not systematically monitored or reported by equality grounds. Newer clubs, many of which are from predominantly Protestant communities, face particular challenges. As a result, governance structures continue to be dominated by representatives from older, more established clubs. This should not be taken as a criticism of those individuals, but it does mean that participation in decision-making does not yet reflect the diversity of the clubs across Ulster. In examining Ulster Boxing, it became clear that considerable work has already been done in examining these issues. But regardless of the extent to which previous report recommendations are dealt with, we believe they should be revisited. Promoting equality should be an ongoing effort and something that senior leadership teams revisit frequently. We believe our recommendations are practical and forward-looking. We recommend as a priority the development and publication of clear, objective, merit-based selection criteria for elite pathways and major competitions. We recommend the establishment of an independent oversight panel involving the Department for Communities, Sport NI, the Irish Athletic Boxing Association and the Ulster Boxing Council, with independent representation from both main communities to monitor and report on progress. We recommend revisiting and completing the outstanding 2013 Independent Working Group recommendations, particularly in relation to flags, emblems, codes of conduct and neutral venues. And finally, we recommend targeted developmental support for newer clubs, supported by Sport NI, to build governance, capacity and ensure fair participation at all levels. The Commission is confident that these issues are resolvable, and with leadership, transparency and oversight, Ulster Boxing can demonstrate compliance with equality law, reduce legal risk and continue to be a powerful force for good relations in our society. Moving forward and looking at next steps, the Irish Athletic Boxing Association has committed to identifying an independent, suitably qualified person to oversee and ensure the implementation of the recommendations arising from this review. And we understand from the Minister's statement to the Assembly that he will establish and chair the oversight panel. We look forward to engaging with this panel, and we have recommendations that the oversight panel ensures that all recommendations are progressed within an 18-month period. We remain available to engage further with the relevant bodies in relation to next steps, and we will offer support where possible to ensure they comply with equality law and promote equality of opportunity. And Chairman, we're happy to take any questions that your committee might have.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. That's very useful, and appreciate you attending today and taking committee's questions in relation to this issue. So, while this report is about boxing, does the Commission believe that there is learning in it for other sports?
We believe firmly that it does, because these are practices that will help embed equality law and compliance with it. It will help lead to a more transparent, well-led organisation that is fully in compliance with governance requirements. More and more sports are dependent upon public funding, and public funders too would require those kind of governance arrangements. So we believe it has benefit for all sporting organisations.
Okay, and what governance and enforcement mechanisms would you recommend would ensure that the long-standing recommendation on flags, emblems, codes of conduct, reporting of discriminatory incidents move from draft or informal practice that you have described to a more mandatory monitored compliance across all events.
Yeah, I think the recommendations that we have set out and the structures that we have recommended in terms of monitoring the implementation of those recommendations would lead to an organisation that has very strong governance arrangements. I think we're all well versed now in what those governance arrangements are required for a good functioning, well-led organisation. So I think that the report is quite clear in terms of the steps that need to be taken, but it's about working together. There are recommendations in relation to flags and emblems and neutral venues, but I think it's important to recognise that the clubs need to come together, the associations need to come together and define what those are. There must be buy-in from all parties, and it's about setting that down in a code of conduct that everyone has agreed to and can sign up to, and it provides a benchmark against which behaviours can be monitored and reported on. And it's that ongoing monitoring and reporting procedures that will ultimately lead to change in culture.
Thank you. And I suppose I just want to reiterate, in my view, what we're doing and what is happening in this space should be inclusive, respectful, allowing athletes to progress and perform to the top of their ability in a way that they feel very, very comfortable with. And given, and this is the final one for me, and then I'm going to come to members, given the report seeks to prevent discrimination, are the recommendations applicable to other governing bodies and Sport NI in terms of informing the protections that they should have in place?
I think it's important to re-emphasise that this report that we have produced was done on the basis of a mediated settlement between the parties in this case. We don't normally go out and carry out these kind of reviews on sporting clubs. But I think the lessons learnt and the recommendations are all designed to ensure that equality is embedded within the structures of the association, and therefore there is learning for everyone. It is developed in terms of the framework that is applicable under the Fair Employment and Treatment Order for employers, and the same criteria can be used to ensure that equality law and good relations is really embedded within all associations that operate on a cross-community basis.
Thank you. And actually I have one other just that kind of flows from something that you said in relation to, you were very clear that IABA and Ulster Boxing Council had cooperated fully and continued, that work continues, that good work that you described continues till today. And it's about ensuring that we support that work and not undermining. Do you have any concerns in relation to the Minister's statement that support, that it would be more supportive, or do you have any concerns in listening to what the Minister's response was?
I don't wish to get into the politics around these issues, but I think it is to be welcomed that the Minister has taken these recommendations seriously, and that his department is working to establish that oversight panel, because if you look at our recommendations, we've said that panel needs to be chaired by someone with good standing, someone who has the confidence of all of the parties to be able to call out when action and progress isn't being made, but to be supportive as well. Because I think more and more, as they delve into trying to develop arrangements and procedures, etc., I think we all need to be cognizant of the fact that if we look at venues, for example, that requires money, it requires funding and resource to be able to have venues. And therefore, if you're applying for public funding, you need to show that you have a well-governed and a well-led organisation. And that's ultimately what this report is trying to deliver.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, so I have Pam, Sean, Melissa and Mark. So if we could ask members just to be as succinct as possible, but please go ahead, Pam.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Geraldine and your team, for your time here today and for the report in front of us. I suppose just to say from the outset that it's very sad to see, you know, what we have seen in terms of the experience that Darrell Clark and Lewis Crocker have both had, and that cold house for Protestantism is very, very sad to see, especially given the 6-year period intervening that it would seem that nothing had changed. But I wanted to ask how serious the failure to implement the 2013 moral recommendations from an equality compliance perspective is from your point of view, and also want to ask what enforcement mechanisms you feel are available if recommendations are not implemented. that would be my first two for now.
Okay. We'll start with the last point first, because that's the bit I can remember best. The enforcement. You've got to remember that the enforcement part for the Equality Commission and the ability to carry out investigations is really in relation to employment matters, and therefore the power to investigate and to issue binding directions doesn't apply in this case. We're very much limited by the legislation, and indeed it would be one of the areas that we have highlighted on many previous occasions in terms of the review and the reform of equality legislation to enable to step into situations like this. But I think it's unfair to say that there wasn't progress in relation to the recommendations made in 2013. My point here is that those actions are ongoing actions. They were done at a point in time, but they need to be revisited and to be kept alive and continually reviewed. That is why we're saying you need to go back and look at them again, because environments change, circumstances change, and that is why they are actually living actions. Now, there were a couple of the actions that weren't actually implemented, particularly the one from the Independent Working Group in relation to I think it was Action 12 in terms of venues, etc., and emblems, flags and emblems. That was dependent on a piece of work that was being done by others, and I think it was published in 2021, but it's about the actions that need to be put in place following from that. So my point is they are ongoing. They should not be castigated that they didn't do the work that was required of them in 2013. Sport and I are on record of having said that they did do it. Various audit reports also highlighted that work was done. But it's taking that work and embedding it, reviewing it and monitoring it and keeping it alive. That's what's needed.
Really, that's that really underpins the need for the independent oversight panel, which I certainly welcome, because we just want to see fairness throughout, you know.
Yeah, one other point I would make in relation to your comment. Part of the issues about governance in particular is about the fact that without keeping data as to where monitoring where people are coming from in terms of the representation on committees across both the council and the association, it leaves a gap where if you haven't built up capacity within newer clubs to work their way through that hierarchy of positions, then the status quo has a tendency to remain. So my point is that the older club representation who have historically been on these committees, there's less new blood coming up through to replace them and to recycle that kind of experience and expertise and contribution to the committees. And that's where we're saying that capacity building within newer clubs needs to have a programme around it to build that capacity, because we recognise that most of the newer clubs, or a large proportion of the newer clubs, come from one section of the community, and hence the failure to get that kind of perspective onto the overarching committees, rather than an actual determination not to have them there. It's about providing them the support and building their capacity to enable them to be there.
Okay, thank you. Sean?
Thank you so much, Commissioner, for attending today. And I think so much of what you said I absolutely agree with, and I think having it in writing around how we should be creating and nurturing these safe, neutral spaces, where especially young people coming into sport, where they can actually come together. I think that's vital, and a lot of the recommendations that I'm seeing will hopefully nurture that. And that kind of follows on to my question, is that the report largely treats that culture can be something that will improve if processes are in place or are embedded. We've seen in practice that doesn't always follow through, even with the best will in the world. You can have all the strategies, processes and documents. Is that a concern of the Commission, that if it's not borne out in practice, if it's not actually, I suppose, changed off the page, not just in the processes?
Yeah. It is always going to be a concern, and that is why we have recommended that there needs to be an oversight panel with buy-in from all of the parties, with a strong leader who has the standing to be able to encourage and ensure action. Policies, procedures are all very well at a point in time, but ask any good leader, they are living and evolving policies and procedures. They need to be reviewed on a regular basis to ensure they're being embedded. There must be learning from the monitoring exercises that are carried out as part of that to ensure that the policy is effective. And if it's not effective, why is it not? That's all part of the learning and evolving and the leading of any organisation. So we're looking to see that that is embedded within the culture of Ulster Boxing in this particular case. And that will be the role of the oversight panel to make sure that that is actually carried out and that there's a structure there to monitor it moving forward.
And can I ask, is it one of the, I suppose maybe the weaknesses that's been highlighted to me is just the I suppose the levels of siloing that happens, in terms of we have the department, then we have Sport NI, and then we have the independent codes and their governing bodies. Has that played into some of this? And I suppose whenever you talk about the capacity building and the new blood coming up through, has that been a feature of that? And will an oversight panel hopefully try and streamline some of that siloing? Is that the hope?
Yeah, it's not so much a siloing, but it's about making sure that the capacity is there amongst the members of various clubs, whether it be at officer level or referee level, whatever the case might be, to ensure that their skill set is developed to enable them to take on that. Now, that could be applied and transferred to any kind of sporting association or any other organisation. And I think it's really important that the monitoring, the code of conduct and how the issues are monitored, reported on and analysed feeds into that whole process of ongoing development. Alden, do you want to add to what you have witnessed?
So,
please, Alden.
Sure, and thank you, committee. So we spent about 6 months engaging with the various parties, so the IABA officials, Ulster Boxing Council officials, the various boxing clubs, the Sport NI officials. Ulster Boxing Council officials also are involved in clubs. So we spent about 6 months. So I wouldn't describe a silo effect there at all. I don't think it would be fair for me to say that, because I didn't come across that. People engaged very openly with us. I think probably within and boxing is a complex and very large organisation. I mean, it's quite exemplar in many ways, and so it probably has unique issues, but also issues common across other organisations. So I think probably communication within the organisation was probably one of the areas that we would have wanted to see them look at, and I think it's within the report. But it would be unfair to say that it's siloed between the department and Sport NI and the Ulster Boxing Council and IABA. I mean, very clearly they talk to each other. Belfast City Council, for example, are involved in funding boxing, and there seems to me to be close communication between them.
Good to know.
Yep, thank you. Okay, Melissa, Lanneray or the Cashtain, Lidhull.
Well, Jess, it's nice meeting with you, so Father Rove. You're very welcome.
Okay.
And someone who's always interested in boxing, and my son fought out of the club in Castleberg and then at the boxing club in Rafo that was led by the great recently deceased Peter O'Donnell at the time. So as I say that I'm well aware of the structures in that in many respects as far as boxing is concerned. And I'm very glad to note that that you have actually mentioned that the boxing fraternity has really brought communities together in a whole lot of ways. And I enjoyed that throughout that whole troubled period, and that as well too, when I met with people from other boxing clubs when we attended tournaments and the likes of it. And I can verify that was exactly the case. But can I ask you, you made the comment there about the Irish Athletic Boxing Association and the role that they have now in terms of, we'll say, overseeing the recommendations and the likes of it. And I wonder that if it in any way runs contrary to what has been set up, we'll say, in terms of the oversight panel. And I know that the Minister himself said that he's taken direct control And I wonder, that really sounds like political interference within, we'll say, a structure as such. And given that the Minister himself has accused IABA and the likes of it in the boxing fraternity of discrimination, something that hasn't been found in your report or anything else. But would that cause you concern as well too in relation to that?
Well, at the outset, it's not for the Irish Athletic Boxing Association on its own. It's that in conjunction with the Ulster Boxing Council and Sport NI and Department for Communities. It's for all parties to come together to take these actions and move them forward. And all of the parties have agreed to do that. Now, with the Minister saying that he's going to chair the panel, I don't have any concerns about that, because we are looking for someone with standing and strength to be able to ensure that movement is achieved, that progress is made. But we did say it's for the Department of Communities, and that is the Minister's department. That's a matter for him. We have no comment to make on that. Our only recommendation was that the panel needed to be chaired by someone of good standing who had the ability to drive actions. So I don't have any concerns about political interference, because it's all of the stakeholders coming to the table, and that includes Sport NI, for which the Minister is responsible.
Yes, in saying that, I can appreciate that where that committee in itself would need to have someone that can take responsibility for it and enact, we'll say decisions and recommendations that they might make. But given that they're coming maybe already with an agenda, that would cause me concern. I don't know, would it not cause you concern?
Well, those are political issues, but we have already committed to being available to give advice and guidance and support to that panel, because it is for them to ensure that there's buy-in across the whole sport fraternity of boxing. And I think that that is something that we will continue to observe. We will not be members of the panel, but we will be there to give advice and guidance. Thank you.
Mark, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to Geraldine and the team for coming along. Melissa, to ask the question I was thinking of asking there, but it's just in terms of, yes, the standing of the Minister, given that what he had said and how he had framed this in the Assembly. And I know you don't want to be dragged into the politics of it, Geraldine, but whenever we go back to the Minister's statement and in relation to the Equality Commission report, he says, a number of details are now clear to me. Firstly, it is my view that Darrell Clark was discriminated against because he was a Protestant. But do you think that's a logical or fair conclusion for anyone to come to upon reading your report?
Our report does not seek to revisit the terms of the settlement or the case, Darrell Clark's case or Lewis Crocker's case. We are looking at ensuring that equality legislation and that framework is embedded within the organisation and where it stands in that regard. Our remit was not to revisit or make findings of discrimination. It is within the Minister's gift to make statements as he sees fit, as it would be for anyone round the committee table within the Assembly. It is not for us, and we have not sought to identify discrimination or otherwise, because ultimately it is the courts and tribunals that will make those decisions. It's not for the Equality Commission to do that. So I don't wish to get involved in a political spat as to the rights and wrongs of discrimination or otherwise. There was a mediated settlement, and this is about putting structures in place to ensure that that kind of issue shouldn't arise in the future, because there is greater understanding amongst all the parties as to how decisions are made and how the sport is governed. So that is our focus, not on the comments of individuals, political or otherwise, about what their views might be, because everyone's entitled to their view. But ultimately, it is for the courts and tribunals to determine if discrimination actually took place.
Okay, and we would never defend discrimination of any type or on any grounds, and it is important that these things are put in place. I suppose most are importantly to prevent discrimination, but also to maybe safeguard against the perception of or allegations of discrimination going forward too. Other members have spoken of the unifying or uniting power of sport, and I'd like to just acknowledge the role that boxing in particular has played in that regard over the years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Morris.
Thank you, Chair. Because of time, I'll try and be very brief. I suppose as someone who's been involved, and thank you very much for your presentation, I find it very, very interesting and very worthwhile. As somebody that's been involved with sport and still involved from the age of 14, I have always sought to keep politics out of sport, and any sport that gets involved with politics usually runs into trouble. That's just my personal view. However, recommendations have been made, and as far as I'm reading into this here, the recommendations that were made in 2012, 2013 were completely ignored or totally ignored or partially ignored. So my point is that your recommendations, as I see them here, need to be implemented, but how do you ensure that they're implemented? It's still a voluntary code. Will you be monitoring your recommendations to see that they're implemented? Will you be evaluating? What's the checks and balances that'll change the face of boxing in this country once and for all? And I say that we have two excellent boxing clubs in Coleraine, where I'm from. One through Michael Fleming and the other one's connected to the football club, and they're both cross-community, and they do an awful lot of good work taking young people off the street, training them up and giving them discipline. So it's not the sport, it's those that run the sport that need to have their ideology changed. And how do you monitor that?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's fair. We certainly wouldn't agree with your comment that the recommendations made in 2013 were ignored. Sport NI and others have confirmed that there was work done. All of the recommendations, I think bar one or two, were confirmed as being complete in 2016 by Sport NI. Now, the problem is, as I've said earlier, those recommendations require ongoing work. Things have changed since 2013, and it's about ensuring that they are as robust as they can be and that everyone buys into it. That is why we're saying you need to go back and revisit it, because certain actions are ongoing actions. They're not just you do something and you stop. You have to keep on going with it and reviewing it and revisiting it. In terms of the culture change or moving things along within boxing, as I said, we weren't there carrying out this review to look at whether or not discrimination was taking place. We were there to make sure that there was fair and equitable treatment, that everyone had the equality of opportunity, and everyone knew how they could progress through the various levels of the sport. And our recommendations are focused on doing that. We believe that with capacity building and the development of newer clubs and the monitoring of that training that's given and the monitoring of who sits on what governance committee and ensuring wide representation will address any of those shortcomings in terms of what you might perceive as being a cultural issue. What we perceived and what we saw was the fact that there was no movement, there was a stagnation in terms of membership. And we're at pains to say that we're not criticising people who are participating in the leadership of boxing, but we're saying and making recommendations as to how new voices can be added into that mix so that everyone can have buy-in and understanding, and that the knowledge that's been built up in the sport over many, many years can be spread out. Because part of the problem has been the communication of pathways, of criteria, hasn't always got to those who need to know. And there has been some criticism about the fact that clubs haven't always got that kind of information. And we're saying with proper processes and proper communication and proper policies and procedures within the organisation, that those kind of criticisms should not be coming forward in the future. I think that's where we're coming from. Do you want to add to that, Louise?
Yeah, please, Louise.
Yeah, just quickly to add, in terms of oversight, I think that the monitoring role is for the oversight panel. The Commission, it's not wouldn't be within our remit to do that. We are there to provide advice, And ultimately, I suppose the ultimate result, if it's not done, there will be more cases potentially, and the Commission has been there before. So that would be our role in the future, but we would be there to provide advice in this next 18 months, and hopefully the oversight panel will make progress on that.
And if further complaints are made and they progress in the way Darrell Clark and Lewis Crocker did, then it will be for the Commission to consider whether or not we can come in and support those individuals in asserting their rights and their allegations of discrimination. And each case would be taken on its own merits within our legislative framework.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious
two
we've a lot to do here on the
First
sign
one,
language. Very briefly.
point is that if the recommendations made before were not fully implemented, then they weren't implemented, no matter how you gloss it over. Second thing is, I never mentioned the word discrimination.
Okay.
Just 2 points.
Okay, no,
So
quite well made.
We're coming for a final word from our Deputy Chair, Cathy Mason. Cathy, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Chair. And I just want to really briefly, first of all, go back to the points that Mark and Militia both raised. And I'm not sure that I would categorise that as a political spat. I would categorise that as concern, and maybe that a rational view would be an independent chair taking direct control. But anyway, that's not the question that I wanted to ask. There's recommendations that state around pathways, and you mentioned pathways a couple of times, when it comes to competing at national level. And I think there's a reminder in there around obligations that they have under the Good Friday Agreement and the likes of that. And in recent weeks and months, I've been involved in meetings with athletes from various sports, from judo, powerlifting, cycling, cricket, just to name a few, who have concerns around pathways, specifically around Irish pathways, and that their identities are persistently being defunded and erased or ignored. Is this something that you're aware of? Is this something that the Commission would look into? And I suppose on the back of that, given the breadth of all of those sports who all fall under the umbrella of Sport NI, is there a case of a report around Sport NI?
Well, one of the recommendations within the Independent Working Group from 2013 was actually looking at pathways. And we have made further recommendations leading on from that. I think it was recommendation 12 that looked at that. And it's really for Sport NI, UK Sport and the Irish Sports Council to look at those kind of pathways and how people can make their choices. It's not something that would be within the Equality Commission's remit. It is something for others to consider, and where we can give advice and guidance, we certainly will. But Alden, have you had any questions very quickly raised in relation to that in your discussions?
So the answer is no. Within the context of this review, we did look at the pathways and whether the pathway document had been produced, which is the outworking of the 2013 review, and that pathways document is there. It's on the IABA website, and they have set out, as they were required to do, a document setting out pathways. The Sport NI had been leading on that work, but no, we haven't been involved in other sports.
Would that be raised with you in the future? Is that something that the Commission would look at?
Well, we don't have a direct legal varies to look at that, but we would be prepared to give advice and guidance in relation to good and harmonious. And advices that we have given in the past have always been, be mindful of the good relations implications of the actions that you take and how you develop those. But some of those recommendations and actions that were contained within recommendation 12 of the Independent Working Group are of such a scale that they would require political and constitutional considerations in relation to wider society in Northern Ireland. But for individual sports, it's a matter for their governing bodies and for their members to consider and bring forward their own recommendations that they can live with, because the Good Friday Agreement was quite clear in terms of being able to identify with one party or another. And many sports are developed in such a way that it's whether it's golf or swimming, it's Swim Ireland, for example, and there's a GB basis. They all have their own arrangements, and they're able to live within that and participate. So it's really for them to be able to come together and engage with their membership and seek the proper way forward that everyone can buy into. But we don't have a role directly within our legal framework.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner, and your team. I want to thank you for coming along today and for assisting committee in respect of this issue, and we look forward to engaging with you again in the future.
Our pleasure, and thank you very much for the invitation. And if members are having any issues in relation to accessing the report, we're happy to address those if you just let us know by email.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Okay. Members, I propose maybe taking a short comfort break there. We have quite a bit of work to do on the sign language bill, so we'll maybe take a 5-minute break and then get stuck into the sign language bill. Thank you.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
We had wanted to go.
Is there anything different in this from the one you sent last night?
Not in these sections, no, just the PAM. Very late additions, just
anything marked in the others, what their amendments are and all that sort of stuff.
Work on this
So
for
what they have
the
to-
margin of this.
actually-
We confirm when we're back
Live
into
now.
Okay, members, thank you. And that's us back into broadcasting and resuming our meeting at agenda item 11, Sign Languages Bill, and this is a departmental briefing on amendments. The papers for this agenda item, members, start at page 399 4 of the meeting pack. These include a tracked version of the departmental amendments and the updated deliberations table, which includes the amendments for our consideration. I now welcome the following officials to the meeting: Ian Greenway, who is Sign Language Policy and Legislation Branch within the DFC, Tommy McCauley in the Sign Language Policy and Legislation Branch, and Gerard Flynn in Sign Language Policy and Legislation Branch. No strangers to committee at this stage, I have to say, as a team. And Ian, can I now go on back to yourself, invite you to brief the committee in relation to the department's amendments before we move to any follow-up questions from members.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. It's good to be reaching this stage on this important bill, and we appreciate the joint working as we work through that. And we have sent through drafts by Office of Legislative Council of departmental amendments, all but 2 of which have been discussed and debated in various committee hearings over the autumn. There are 2 departmental amendments. One is quite deeply technical around allowing flexibility if we wanted to do something about 3 government departments, shall we say, and so on. So I suspect that one won't hold us back too long. It's just about flexibility. And the other is to copper fasten that the sign language classes will be free in clause 2. And so technically it's a small number of words, but it's obviously of significant importance for those who draw on those classes. The other amendments I think we've been backwards and forwards with as through various correspondence and hearings, and I would not intend to take any more of your time before we get into any detailed discussion, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you, and I'll go to members' questions. But I suppose some of the things I just want to make note of before we come to members is I welcome the addition of free of charge to clause 2 in terms of the classes. I think that's useful. In terms of clause 4, there's now higher assembly control in terms of adding and removing organisations from the prescribed list. However, committee was content that any additions were done by negative resolution for expediency, which was our understanding as part of the rationale. Can you explain why the department prefers draft affirmative for that?
The First Legislative Council says it is technically very difficult to separate in one clause the 2 things and have negative for one and affirmative for the other. We had committed that removal would be affirmative, so we have rolled with that to affirmative for all.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Clause 5 and 8 then, again, I welcome the increase in terms of numbers of persons or groups the department should consult with. Can you confirm that the deaf community here is reflective of ISL, BSL, deaf, blind, etc.? That is that all of these groups in reality would need to be consulted rather than 2 groups from either BSL or ISL community, for example?
Yes, that has always been our MO in the past and will be going forward. And indeed, as we've explained previously, working the framework, we're consulting BSL, ISL and deaf-blind citizens also. So it will be reflective of those individuals and groups.
Okay. And can you explain why you decided to make the changes to clause 7?
This is to the amendments around on behalf of and or in the interests.
We thought it would be given more clarity rather than someone just acting on behalf of, trying to give more sort of detail on they must reflect the views and be cognizant of the views of the deaf community. So taking in the round, we've hopefully reached out to the members of the committee for your amendments, suggested amendments, and tightened up our wording where we felt it appropriate, which we think reflects your thinking also. And we hope it does.
Okay, so members, any other further questions for officials? Kelly?
Yes, guys, now bear with me on this one because I'm not convinced that we've covered it correctly, and this is about let me just get the right clause up in front of you here. It's the part where you've changed it. I have no issue with changing it to young people. However, we had considered as a committee, ensuring that as many people as possible could be included in this as part of the deaf community. But I know that we had considered adding in different types of people to it. Can I just confirm then the access to the classes that are mentioned and they're free of charge, which are very welcome, are limited to deaf children, young persons who are deaf and their families? This Sign Language Act is about promoting and making sign language available but it just seems to me that those free classes are linked only to children, young persons, sorry, because we're changing that to young persons and their families, and not to other people who have lost hearing through age or illness. So can you just clarify where you think that's already covered in it or isn't covered in it?
Well, I think it's important. The first line of this subclause says without prejudice to the generality of this section, because the generality of this section is around promoting and other discussions we've had in the past. This is saying that children who are born deaf are have a particular challenge of communicating, engaging, being part of society beyond that may occur to others who have lost their hearing over time. That's not in any way to deny the impact that has personally or in communities, but there is a particular, and there is a proven particular issue with younger people, their educational attainment, connecting to the school system and education and so on. So we are saying we have this specific need to address this, and we feel it is so important that we want to embed it in primary legislation on the face of the bill, the Act, without prejudice to the generality of sign language action plans, etc.
So what you're saying is this section, rather than excluding others, it's heightening the availability for children who are born deaf. We had thought about children of deaf parents who have the same educational issues as children who are born deaf, because the communications within the household are different. So I'm just wondering, are they children of deaf parents by not naming them, by only naming those who are?
I'll let Tommy come to the CODA point.
Yeah, I mean, the quotas, as you know, have been defined as members of the deaf community for the purpose of this bill. With regards to quotas, it's a different angle in that there will be a familiar language within the home, and that generally, not always, would be a sign language. As Ian has mentioned, it does say without prejudice to the generality of this section. We have funded sign language courses for quotas, so we don't need primary to do that. Okay. But we do believe that access to family sign language for now young people up to 25 is an absolute priority, which is why we think it belongs in primary legislation. With regards to other types of access to courses, subject to budget, of course, we have already funded and engaged with quotas and supplied these courses. Indeed, we've reflected probably the majority of our interpreters in Northern Ireland are quotas, so there would be language based there anyway. The most recent quota course we funded with Hands at Talk was for level 4, and that's kind of a level plus basis, so that sets them up with their natural family language. They can fast track through that, so you also at the same time increase the capacity and cohort for future interpreters, teachers.
I accept that, but the deaf community, as we know, is all ages, and while absolutely we want to see improvements for children, and the deaf community themselves in our consultation have highlighted that, I just have concern that we're missing it's a wee bit of age discrimination. So anyone who's lost their hearing due to illness or injury, and we know that there are a number of people who live in nursing homes, and we've had evidence from the deaf community about people living in nursing homes who are older, who have lost their hearing and they're living in isolation now. They have very little communication, and if they had access to a form of communication such as sign language, it would vastly improve their lives. So I agree that we certainly need to keep the young people in it, but I'm wondering, is it just purely because of cost that we don't extend those classes?
It is, I mean, we didn't have to put in families, parents, support workers of deaf children. We chose to on the basis of the feedback we've been getting, and indeed we've received a report, an independent review of our programme for family signing from Queen's, which endorses the benefits and the absolute necessity of these, not only to be available but to be available free, which factored in the RDSation to include the word free. As part of our funding criteria, we have personal development programmes to redress academic underachievement in deaf people, so we can already do that. We don't feel it's necessary or appropriate to put it in primary, whereas as we keep repeating ourselves for deaf children and young people, there is no language without this. There is no other show in town, and we are well aware of the negative impacts. And I would draw your attention, I think the committee is already aware of the BDA report. For every £1 invested in early years sign language provision, £14 benefits are realised throughout the life span of that.
I'm not arguing
person.
with that.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that there isn't a report on old people and isolation and the level of depression, mental health problems, their lack of access to health, everything because they don't have language anymore because they've lost their hearing. I'm just wondering, in this Sign Language Act, we've certainly looked at children. I agree with that. But why can't we have those adults who have lost their hearing with illness or injury?
Just to finalise on that, I mean, the family sign-in is preventative so that we don't, in the next generation, have people who are going through that isolation, depression and the behavioural and mental health issues that are well documented. We can do that now, but there, as we've mentioned previously, there are a sort of big demand on all our resources. We have identified that prevention, early intervention is key, which is why we've included families and deaf children within the primary. There's nothing to prevent us and hasn't stopped us to date. For example, if you look at the cohort of deaf tutors, a lot of those would have gone through some courses that we've funded. You look at and deaf and interpreter training, deaf translators, they would have been through courses that we funded for their linguistic qualifications. We do it. We just think it's an absolute necessity and priority that families are protected under the legislation.
No, I can understand that, but I am concerned that we are leaving out a section of the community that's lives would be fundamentally changed by access to sign language classes. We'll maybe agree to differ on that one, given the fact that we have an ageing population. You know, I understand completely what you're saying, but it seems to be based on what money's available now. This is legislation. The money situation could vastly change, we wish, in the future.
I suppose the one point I would just add to what Tommy has said, Kelly, is this is saying there is a particular priority for the reasons Tommy has set out to young people that we feel is so important for the reasons Tommy has set out, and indeed you've alluded to be on the face of the bill, on the face of the primary legislation. It is without prejudice to generality and the duty of the department to promote, and the Sign Language Action Plans to bring forward best practice, guidance in best practice, etc. It is in no way excluding. It is saying this is so important, we feel it belongs here. I accept that's a matter of judgment, and I accept there may be differing views.
Yeah, no, I, to be honest, I just don't like ageism being brought into anything. I absolutely support the children's side of it. We know how beneficial and how life-changing this will be for children, but we're not recognising that for older people who've lost their hearing, and as someone who will be deaf, completely deaf, in the next 20 years, it's a difficult one to sort of understand. There are people who are being prepared for having no hearing. Thankfully, I'm one of those people, but there are others who've lost their hearing after pension age, so they don't qualify for PIP or anything like that there, so it's very different. I think, to be honest, Chair, that's my main one at this stage. There are other parts that I'm not in agreement with the department on, but many of the amendments that you're bringing forward I have absolutely no issue with. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Can I check if anyone else has any further questions? So I'll go ahead, Pam.
It's more of a comment to say thank you for the work done to date. I do get where Kelly's come from there, but I don't think you're right in terms of the ageism piece, because really what you're talking about is going underneath and problem solving for the future. You know, when this comes up, this should actually
no, I just to be honest, I speak with people all the time with no communication, and they're older and they're out of this.
Okay, well listen, members, we are moving into closed session shortly, but we will welcome officials back to the table for the formal clause by clause when we come back into public session. But as the next agenda item is this committee's consideration of amendments on the Sign Language Bill, and Liz Marsh, Bill Clerk, is in attendance, I propose, with members' agreement, that the meeting moves into closed session. Are members agreed? Yep, thank you.
You're open?
Okay, thank you, members. So we're now back in open session, and just to note that we have paused our consideration at item 11, clause 9, which we will return to next week, and we will now revert to or go forward to agenda item 14 in the forward work programme. So a copy of the forward work programme is contained at page 463. Do members have any comments, or are you content to note the forward work programme? Content, thank you. Agenda item 15, any other business, members? Yeah, go ahead, Pam.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. And I'd indicated at an earlier time that I would like to ask if we could potentially schedule in a briefing around the Northern Ireland Housing Executive succession to tenancy policy. I'm sure we've all had lots of communications with constituents over these matters over the years. I just think it'd be a really good one to delve into a bit more, given the challenges there are around
In
that.
person, yeah.
That would be preferable if the committee go on. I understand we are under lots of pressure and will continue to be, but I think it's a very worthwhile briefing to have.
Okay, yeah. Members agreed?
Agreed, yeah.
Kelly?
No.
Moving on to agenda item 16, date, time and location of the next meeting. Our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 22nd of January 2026 in room 29 here in Parliament Buildings. Thank you, members. The meeting is now adjourned.